I never imagined that a Tuesday afternoon would be the day I finally had enough of Patricia Williams, my mother-in-law, and her increasingly bizarre attempts to control every aspect of our family's life. But watching my 7-year-old daughter, Lily, and 9-year-old son, Marcus, trudge through our front door with tear-stained faces and empty piggy banks clutched in their small hands was the moment I knew things had gone too far. "Mommy," Lily whispered, her voice barely audible as she climbed onto my lap in the living room. "Grandma Patricia says we can't play with our toys at her house anymore unless we pay money first." Marcus, trying to be the protective big brother despite his own confusion, stood beside us with his shoulders squared. She made us give her all our allowance money just to go into the playroom. The playroom with our own stuff in it. I felt that familiar knot forming in my stomach, the same one that had been growing tighter over the past 3 years since my husband David's mother had moved into his childhood home after his father's stroke. As a real estate attorney with 15 years of experience handling property disputes, I dealt with plenty of difficult landlords and property managers. But Patricia's behavior had been escalating from passive-aggressive comments to outright exploitation, and now she was targeting my children. "Tell me exactly what happened," I said gently, setting Lily on the couch beside me and pulling out my phone to record their account. Years of legal training had taught me to document everything, especially when dealing with someone as manipulative as Patricia. Marcus took a deep breath, his 9-year-old mind working hard to relay the events clearly. "We went to Grandma's house after school like always, and when we tried to go to the playroom, she stood in front of the door and said we couldn't go in unless we paid a usage fee, because the house costs money to keep up. She said it was $5 each time we wanted to play," Lily added, her voice getting smaller, "and $10 if we wanted to take any toys home. She made us empty our piggy banks, and then she only let us play for 30 minutes before saying time was up." I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of months of escalating behavior culminating in this moment. Patricia had been testing boundaries ever since David's father, Harold, had his stroke and moved into assisted living. What started as comments about my parenting had evolved into undermining my authority, making decisions about my children without consulting me, and now financially exploiting them. But what Patricia didn't know, what nobody in the family knew yet, was that I'd been quietly working with Harold for the past 8 months to purchase his house. As his power of attorney for financial matters, I've been helping him navigate the complicated process of liquidating assets to pay for his long-term care. When he mentioned wanting to sell the family home, I made him an offer that benefited everyone. I'd buy the house at fair market value, allowing him to afford the best care facility while keeping the property in the family. The sale had closed 2 weeks ago, but I'd been waiting for the right moment to tell David and deal with the inevitable drama from Patricia. That moment had apparently arrived. Did Grandma Patricia say anything else? I asked my children, my legal mind already cataloging the potential violations of tenant rights that Patricia had just committed. Even if she had been paying rent, which she wasn't, charging fees for access to common areas and essentially holding children's property hostage would constitute harassment. "She said that we need to learn that nothing in life is free," Marcus replied, his voice taking on Patricia's condescending tone, "and that you and Daddy spoil us by not teaching us about money." I felt my jaw clench. Patricia had never worked a day in her adult life, having married Harold straight out of high school and lived off his insurance sales income for 43 years. The irony of her lecturing my children about financial responsibility while living rent-free in a house she didn't own was almost too much to bear. "Okay, babies," I said, forcing my voice to remain calm and reassuring. "Why don't you go upstairs and start your homework? I need to make some phone calls, and then we'll figure this out." After the children headed upstairs, I sat in my home office and pulled out the file I'd been keeping on a house purchase. The deed transfer had been recorded with the county clerk's office exactly 14 days ago, making me the legal owner of 1247 Maple Street, the house Patricia had been treating as her personal kingdom. I opened my laptop and began drafting the notice to quit that I'd never thought I'd actually need to use. As someone who'd spent years helping clients navigate landlord-tenant disputes, I knew exactly what Patricia's rights were as an occupant. Since she'd never had a formal lease agreement and wasn't paying rent, she was essentially a guest who could be asked to leave at any time. The fact that she'd been harassing other occupants, my children, and interfering with their access to the property gave me additional legal grounds for immediate removal. My phone rang, interrupting my legal research. David's name appeared on the screen. "Hey, honey," I answered, already knowing this conversation was going to be difficult. "What did you say to my mother?" David's voice was tight with frustration. "She just called me crying, saying you're threatening her and turning the kids against her." I took a deep breath, reminding myself that David had spent 34 years being manipulated by his mother's version of events. "I haven't spoken to your mother at all today, but I did speak to our children, who came home upset because she charged them money to play with their own toys." "That's not what happened," David said, though I could hear the uncertainty creeping into his voice. "Mom said she was trying to teach them about responsibility, and they misunderstood." "David, she made them empty their piggy banks to access a playroom containing toys we bought them." "How exactly is that a misunderstanding?" Silence stretched between us for several moments. I could picture him standing in his office, running his hand through his hair the way he always did when he was caught between protecting his mother and supporting his family. "Look, maybe she went about it the wrong way," he finally conceded. "But she's been stressed about Dad's situation, and she's trying to figure out how to manage the house expenses on her own." This was the opening I'd been waiting for, though not under these circumstances. "Actually, honey, we need to talk about the house situation. Can you come home a little early today?" "Why? What's going on?" "There are some things about your father's financial arrangements that we need to discuss as a family. Things that affect your mother's living situation." I could hear papers shuffling in the background, and I knew David was already mentally rearranging his schedule. As a project manager for a construction company, he was used to dealing with unexpected complications. "I'll be home by 4, he said. "But Alex, please don't do anything dramatic before we can talk this through." After we hung up, I continued preparing the legal documents I hoped I wouldn't need to use. But years of experience had taught me that dealing with someone like Patricia required having all your options ready. I printed out the deed showing my ownership, the notice to quit, and a timeline of Patricia's increasingly problematic behavior that I'd been documenting for months. At 3:47 p.m., I heard David's truck pull into our driveway. Through the window, I watched him sit in the cab for a few minutes, gathering himself for whatever conversation awaited him. I loved my husband deeply, but his relationship with his mother was the one source of ongoing tension in our marriage. He'd spent his entire life trying to manage her moods and protect other people from her manipulative behavior, and breaking that pattern was proving difficult. "Hey," he said as he walked into the kitchen, immediately moving to pour himself a cup of coffee. "The kids upstairs." "Doing homework," I confirmed, settling myself at the kitchen table with my folder of documents. "David, before we talk about today, I need to tell you something about your father's house." He turned to face me, coffee mug halfway to his lips. "What about it?" "Your father decided to sell it. The medical bills and care facility costs were going to drain his savings within 6 months. So we've been working together to liquidate his assets in a way that would give him the most financial security." David set his mug down hard enough that coffee sloshed onto the counter. "You've been working together on what? Why didn't anyone tell me?" "Because your father asked me to handle it as his attorney, and he wanted to have a complete plan before discussing it with the family. He was trying to protect everyone from worrying about his financial situation." "Okay," David said slowly, leaning against the counter. "So who bought the house? How much time does Mom have to find somewhere else to live?" I opened the folder and pulled out the deed, sliding it across the table toward him. "I bought the house, David, 2 weeks ago. Your mother isn't in immediate danger of being homeless, but the situation has changed." David stared at the document for a long moment, his expression cycling through confusion, surprise, and something that might have been relief. "You bought Dad's house. Why did you tell me?" "Because I knew it would create drama with your mother, and I wanted to have a plan in place for handling that drama before we told anyone. I was going to discuss it with you this weekend, but today's events with the kids have accelerated the timeline." "What does this mean for Mom?" I pulled out the behavioral documentation I'd been keeping and spread it across the table. "It means your mother is now living in my house, and her behavior toward our children is no longer something we have to tolerate in the name of family harmony." David picked up the first page, scanning the dates and descriptions I'd recorded. His face grew darker as he read through months of incidents, Patricia undermining my parenting decisions, making inappropriate comments about our financial situation, telling the children that I was too strict, and they didn't have to follow rules at her house, and now financially exploiting them. She really said all this stuff, he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Every word is documented with dates, times, and witnesses when applicable. David, your mother has been escalating her behavior for months, and today she crossed a line I can't uncross. She charged our children money to access their own toys. Before David could respond, we'd heard the front door open and Patricia's voice calling out, "David, your mother needs to speak with you immediately." I looked at David and raised an eyebrow. We hadn't invited her over, but Patricia had a long history of showing up uninvited when she felt her control slipping. "In the kitchen, Mom," David called back, his voice carefully neutral. Patricia swept into the room wearing her most dramatic martyred expression, clutching a tissue in one hand and her purse in the other. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but she had perfected the art of filling a room with her emotional energy. "David, thank goodness you're here," she began, completely ignoring my presence. "Your wife has been filling the children's heads with lies about me, and now they're afraid to visit their grandmother." I opened my mouth to respond, but David held up his hand. "Mom, before we talk about today, Alex has something to tell you about Dad's house." Patricia's eyes narrowed as she finally acknowledged my presence. "What about Harold's house? It's been in the Matthews family for 60 years. "It still is," I said calmly, sliding the deed across the table toward her. "I bought it from your husband 2 weeks ago." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the refrigerator humming in the corner. Patricia stared at the document as if it were written in a foreign language. "That's impossible," she finally whispered. "Harold would never sell the house without telling me." Harold needed to liquidate assets to pay for his care, I explained, my voice remaining professionally neutral. As his attorney and power of attorney for financial matters, I helped him find a solution that would keep the house in the family while giving him the resources he needs. Patricia's face cycled through a rainbow of emotions: shock, anger, fear, and something that looked like desperate calculation. "Well, that doesn't change anything. I've been living in that house for 3 years. I have tenant rights." "You have no tenant rights," I replied, pulling out the notice to quit I'd prepared. "You've never had a lease, you've never paid rent, and you've never contributed to household expenses. You've been a guest in Harold's house, and now you're a guest in mine." "A guest?" Patricia's voice was rising to the pitch that usually preceded one of her dramatic scenes. "I've been taking care of that house. I've been maintaining the property and making it a home for the family. According to the documentation I have," I said, opening another folder, "you've made no financial contributions to property taxes, utilities, insurance, or maintenance." Harold continued paying all expenses right up until the sale closed. David was reading through the financial records I provided, his expression growing more troubled with each page. "Mom, you told me you were helping with the house expenses." "I've been contributing in other ways," Patricia protested. "Someone had to be there to supervise repairs and maintain family traditions. That house needs a woman's touch to remain a proper home." I felt my patience finally snap. "Patricia, charging children money to play with their own toys is not maintaining family traditions. It's financial exploitation of minors. I was teaching them responsibility." She shot back, her careful composure finally cracking. "Someone needs to prepare them for the real world since their parents clearly aren't." David set down the financial records and looked directly at his mother. "Mom, you charge my kids money to access their own toys. How is that teaching responsibility?" "Children need to understand that everything costs money," Patricia replied, but her voice was losing its conviction. "The house has expenses, and if they want to enjoy the benefits, they should contribute." "But it's not your house," I said quietly. "It's mine. And my children don't need to pay fees to access their own belongings in a house their parents own." The full weight of the situation was finally hitting Patricia. I could see her mind racing, trying to find an angle that would restore her control over the situation. "This is all just paperwork," she said, her voice taking on a pleading tone. "David, you're not going to let her throw your own mother out on the street, are you? After everything I've done for this family?" David looked between us, and I could see the familiar pattern trying to reassert itself. Patricia creating a crisis, positioning herself as the victim, and expecting David to fix everything at someone else's expense. But this time was different. This time, I held all the cards. "Mom," David said slowly, "you're not going to be homeless. But things are going to change. I pulled out the formal notice I prepared, sliding it across the table to Patricia. You have 30 days to find alternative housing arrangements. Given the circumstances and your behavior toward my children, that's more generous than legally required. Patricia stared at the notice as if it might catch fire. 30 days? David, you can't let her do this to me. Actually, Mom, she can, David said, his voice carrying a finality I'd rarely heard when he spoke to his mother. And honestly, after reading about what you've been doing with the kids, maybe it's time for everyone to have some space. Space. Patricia's voice cracked with disbelief. I'm your mother. I gave you life. I sacrificed everything to raise you. And I appreciate that, David replied. But you charge my children money to play with toys I bought them. That's not acceptable, regardless of whose house it happens in. I watched Patricia's face as she realized that her usual emotional manipulation wasn't working. For the first time in the 3 years I'd known her, she had no leverage, no way to make other people responsible for managing her choices. Where am I supposed to go? She asked, her voice small and defeated. You have options, I said, pulling out the research I'd done over the past few months. There are several nice senior living communities within 20 minutes of Harold's care facility. I can provide you with a list of places that are accepting applications. Senior living? Patricia looked horrified. I'm only 68 years old. And you're about to be 68 and homeless if you don't start making practical decisions, I replied. The sale of Harold's house will provide you with enough money for a substantial down payment on a nice apartment or condo. David reached across the table and took his mother's hand. Mom, this doesn't have to be a bad thing. You've been stressed about maintaining the house and worried about Dad's expenses. This solves both problems. Patricia jerked her hand away from David's. Don't try to make this sound like you're doing me a favor. This is about her wanting to control everything. She pointed an accusatory finger at me. No, I said, my voice remaining calm. This is about protecting my children from being financially exploited by someone who has no legal right to charge them fees for anything. The room fell silent again. Patricia seemed to be processing the reality that her position had fundamentally changed, that the power dynamics she'd been accustomed to no longer applied. Fine, she said finally, her voice cold with fury. If that's how this family treats its elders, then maybe I don't want to be part of it anyway. She stood up abruptly, grabbing her purse and the notice to quit. You'll regret this, David. Both of you will regret treating me this way. After she stormed out, David and I sat in the quiet kitchen, processing what had just happened. Are you okay? I asked, reaching for his hand. He squeezed my fingers and nodded slowly. Yeah, I think I am. For the first time in my adult life, I feel like I can protect my family without having to choose between them and my mother. She'll find somewhere to live, I said, and with some distance and boundaries, maybe your relationship with her can improve. 6 months later, Patricia was settled in a beautiful senior community apartment 15 minutes from Harold's care facility. She'd initially refused to speak to any of us, but gradually began accepting David's weekly phone calls. The children visited her occasionally, though always with David or me present, and she never again charged them for anything. Harold's care was fully funded. Patricia had her own space and independence, and my children could play with their toys without paying fees. Sometimes the best family solutions require clear boundaries and someone willing to enforce them. The house on Maple Street became truly ours, filled with laughter instead of tension, and my children learned that they deserved to be treated with respect by everyone in their lives, even grandmothers.